Friday. Raven Sable, slim and bearded and dressed all in black, sat in the back of his slimline black limousine talking on his slimline black telephone to his West Coast base. "How's it going?" he asked. "Looking good, Chief," said his marketing head. "I'm doing breakfast with all the buyers from all the leading supermarket chains tomorrow. No problem. We'll have meals TM in all the stores this time next month. Good work, Nick." "No problem, no problem. It's good knowing you're behind us, Rave. You give great leadership, guy. Works for me every time." "Thank you," said Sable as he broke the connection. He was particularly proud of Meals, TM. The Nutrition Corporation had started small 11 years ago. A small team of food scientists, a huge team of marketing and public relations personnel, and a neat logo. 2 years of nutrition investment and research had produced Chow, TM. Chow, TM, contained spun, plated, and woven protein molecules capped and coated, carefully designed to be ignored by even the most ravenous digestive tract enzymes. No-cal sweeteners, mineral oils, replacing vegetable oils, fibrous materials, colorings, and flavorings. The end result was food stuff, almost indistinguishable from any other except for two things. Firstly, the price, which was slightly higher, and secondly, the nutritional content, which was roughly equivalent to that of a Sony Walkman. It didn't matter how much you ate, you lost weight. And hair, and skin tone, and if you ate long enough, vital signs. Fat people had bought it. Thin people who didn't want to get fat had bought it. Chow, TM, was the ultimate diet food, carefully spun and woven, textured and pounded to imitate anything, from potatoes to venison, although the chicken sold best. Sable sat back and watched the money roll in. He watched Chow, TM, gradually fill the ecological niche that used to be filled by the old, untrademarked food. He followed Chow, TM, with Snacks, TM, junk food made from real junk. Meals, TM, was Sable's latest brainwave. Meals, TM, was Chow, TM, with an added sugar and fat. The theory was that if you ate enough Meals, TM, you would get A, very fat, and B, die of malnutrition. The paradox delighted Sable. Meals, TM, were currently being tested all over America. Pizza meals, fish meals, Szechuan meals, macrobiotic rice meals, and even hamburger meals. Sable's limousine was parked in the lot of Des Moines, Iowa. Burger Lord, a fast food franchise wholly owned by his organization. It was here that they'd been piloting hamburger meals for the last 6 months. He wanted to see what kind of results they'd be getting. He leaned forward, tapped the chauffeur's glass partition. The chauffeur pressed a switch and the glass slid open. "Sir? I'm going to take a look at our operation, Marlon. I'll be 10 minutes, then back to LA. Sir?" And Sable sauntered into the Burger Lord. It was exactly like every other Burger Lord in America. But not like every Burger Lord across the world. German Burger Lords, for example, sold lager instead of root beer, while English Burger Lords managed to take any American fast food virtues, the speed with which your food was delivered, for example, and carefully remove them. Your food arrived after half an hour at room temperature, and it was only because of the strip of warm lettuce between them that you could distinguish the burger from the bun. The Burger Lord Pathfinder salesman had also been shot 25 minutes after setting foot in France. McLordy the Clown danced in the kitty corner. The serving staff had identical gleaming smiles that never reached their eyes, and behind the counter, a chubby, middle-aged man in a Burger Lord uniform slapped burgers onto the griddle, whistling softly, happy in his work. Sable went up to the counter. "Hello, my name is Marie," said the girl behind the counter. "How can I help you?" "A double burger blaster, thunder, biggin, extra fries, hold the mustard," he said. "Anything to drink?" "A special thick, whippy, choco banana shake." She pressed the little pictogram squares on her till. Literacy was no longer a requirement for the employment in these restaurants. Smiling was. Then she turned to the chubby man behind the counter. "DBTBEF, hold mustard," she said. "Chalk shake." "Uh-huh," crooned the cook. He sorted the food into little paper containers, pausing only to brush the graying cowlick from his eyes. "Here you are," he said. She took them without looking at him, and he returned cheerfully to his griddle, singing quietly, "Love me tender, love me long, never let me go." The man's humming, Sable noted, clashed with the Burger Lord background music, a tinny tape loop of Burger Lord commercial jingle, and he made a mental note to have him fired. Hello, my name is Marie, gave Sable his meal, TM, and told him to have a nice day. He found a small plastic table and sat down in the plastic seat and examined his food. Artificial bread roll, artificial burger, fries that had never even seen potatoes, foodless sauces, even, and Sable was especially pleased with this, the artificial slice of dill pickle. He didn't bother to examine his milkshake. It had no actual food content, but then again, neither did those sold by any of his rivals. All around him, people were eating their unfood with, if not actual evidence of enjoyment, then no more actual disgust than was to be found in burger chains all over the planet. He stood up, took his tray over to the please dispose of your refuse with care receptacle, and dumped the whole thing. If you had told him that there were children starving in Africa, he would have been flattered that you'd noticed. There was a tug at his sleeve. Party name of Sable? Asked a small, bespectacled man in International Express cap, holding a brown paper parcel. Sable nodded. Thought it was you. Looked around, thought, tall gent with a beard, nice suit, can't be that many of them in here. Package for you, sir. Sable signed for it, his real name, 1 word, 6 letters. Sounds like examine. Thank you kindly, sir, said the delivery man. He paused. Here, he said. That bloke behind the counter, does he remind you of anyone? No, said Sable. He gave the man a tip, $5, and opened the package. In it was a small pair of brass scales. Sable smiled. It was a slim smile, and was gone almost instantly. About time, he said. He thrust the scales into his pocket, unheeding of the damage being done to the sleek line of his black suit, and went back to the limo. Back to the office? Asked the chauffeur. The airport, said Sable, and call ahead. I want a ticket to England. Yes, sir. Return ticket to England. Sable fingered the scales in his pocket. Make that a single, he said. I'll be making my own way back. Oh, and call the office for me. Cancel all appointments. For how long, sir? The foreseeable future. And in the burger lord behind the counter, the stout man with the cowlick slid another 6 burgers onto the grill. He was the happiest man in the whole world, and he was singing very softly. You ain't never caught a rabbit, he hummed to himself, and you ain't no friend of mine. The them listened with interest. There was a light drizzle, which was barely kept at bay by the old iron sheets and frayed bits of lino that roofed their den in the quarry, and they always looked to Adam to think things up, to do when it was raining. They weren't disappointed. Adam's eyes were agleam with the joy of knowledge. It had been 3 a.m. before he'd gone to sleep under a pile of new aquarians. And then there was this man called Charles Fort, he said. He could make it rain fish and frogs and stuff. Huh, said Pepper. I bet. Alive frogs? Oh yes, said Adam, warming to his subject. Hopping around and croaking and everything. People paid him money to go away in the end, and he racked his brain for something that would satisfy his audience. He'd done, for Adam, a lot of reading in one go. And he sailed off in the Mary Celeste and founded the Bermuda Triangle. It's in Bermuda, he added helpfully. No, he couldn't have done that, said Wensleydale sternly, because I've read about the Mary Celeste, and there was no one on it. It's famous for having no one on it. They found it floating around all by itself with no one on it. I didn't say he was on it when they found it, did I? Said Adam scathingly. Of course he wasn't on it, 'cause of the UFOs landing and taking him off. I thought everyone knew about that. The them relaxed a bit. They were on firmer ground with UFOs. They weren't entirely certain about New Age UFOs, though. They'd listened to Adam politely on the subject. But somehow modern UFOs lacked punch. If I was an alien, said Pepper, voicing the opinion of them all, I wouldn't go around telling people about all mystic cosmic harmony. I'd say, her voice became hoarse and nasal, like someone hampered by an evil black mask. This is a larger bashter, so you do what you're told, rebel swine. They all nodded. A favorite game in Quarry had been based on a highly successful film series with lasers, robots, and a princess who wore her hair like a pair of stereo headphones. TM. It had been agreed without a word being said that if anyone was going to play the part of any stupid princess, it wasn't going to be Pepper. But eventually the game normally ended in a fight to be the one who was allowed to wear the coal scuttle, TM, and blow up planets. Adam was best at it when he was the villain. He really sounded as if he could blow up the world. The them were, anyway, temporarily on the side of planet destroyers, provided they could be allowed to rescue a princess at the same time. I expect that's what they used to do, said Adam, but now it's different. They all have this bright blue light around them and go around doing good, sort of a galactic policeman going around telling everyone to live in universal harmony and stuff. There was a moment's silence when they pondered this waste of perfectly good UFOs. What I've always wondered, said Brian, is why they call them UFOs when they know that they're flying saucers. I mean, they're identified flying objects then. It's 'cause the government hushes it all up, said Adam. Millions of flying saucers landing all the time, and the government keeps hushing it up. Why? Said Wensleydale. Adam hesitated. His reading hadn't provided a quick explanation for this. New Aquarian just took it as the foundation of belief, both of itself and its readers, that the government had hushed everything up. "'Cause they're the government," Adam said simply. "That's what governments do. They've got this great big building in London full of books and all the things they've hushed up. When the Prime Minister gets into work in the morning, the first thing he does is go around through the big list of everything that's happened in the night and put this big red stamp on them." "I bet he has a cup of tea first and then reads the paper," said Wensleydale, who had, on one memorable occasion during the holidays, gone unexpectedly into his father's office where he had formed certain impressions, and talks about what was on the TV last night. "Well, all right, but after he does that, he gets out the book and the big stamp." "Which says, 'Hush it up,'" said Pepper. "It says 'top secret,'" said Adam, resenting this attempt at bipartisan creativity. "It's like nuclear power stations. They keep blowing them up all the time, but no one ever finds out because the government hushes it up." "They don't keep blowing it up all the time," said Wensleydale severely. "My father says they're dead safe and mean we don't have to live in a greenhouse. Anyway, there's a big picture of one in my comic." Wensleydale's alleged comic was a 94-part work called Wonders of Nature and Science. He had every single one so far and had asked for a new set of binders for his birthday. Brian's weekly reading was anything with a lot of exclamation marks in the title, like whiz or clang, and so was Pepper's, even though under most refined of torture she still wouldn't admit to the fact she also bought just 17 under plain covers. Adam didn't read any comics at all. They never lived up to the kinds of things he could do in his head. "And it doesn't say anything about blowing it up." "Yes," said Brian, "but you lent me that comic afterwards, and I know what type of picture it was." Wensleydale hesitated, and then said in a voice heavy with badly tried patience, "Brian, just because it says exploded diagram..." There was a usual brief scuttle. "Look," said Adam severely, "do you want me to tell you about the aquarium age or not?" The fight, never very serious amongst the siblinghood of them, subsided. "Right," said Adam. He scratched his head. "Now you've made me forget where I've got to," he complained. "Flying saucers," said Brian. Right. "Well, if you do see a flying UFO, these government men, and tell you off," said Adam, getting back into his stride, "in a big black car. It happens all the time in America." The them nodded sagely. Of this, at least, they had no doubt. America was, to them, the place that good people went to when they died. They were prepared to believe that just about anything could happen in America. "Probably causes traffic jams," said Adam. "All these men in black cars going about telling people off for seeing UFOs. They tell you that if you go on seeing them, you'll have a nasty accident." "Probably get run over by a big black car," said Brian, picking a scab on his dirty knee. He brightened up. "Do you know," he said, "my cousin said that in America there's shops that sell 39 different flavors of ice cream?" This silenced even Adam, briefly. "There aren't 39 flavors of ice cream," said Pepper. "There aren't 39 flavors in the whole world." "There could be if you mixed them up," said Wensleydale, blinking owlishly. "You know, strawberry and chocolate, chocolate and vanilla." He thought for some more English flavors. "Strawberry and vanilla and chocolate," he added lamely. "And then there's Atlantis," said Adam loudly. He had their interest there. They enjoyed Atlantis. Cities that sank under the sea were right up in the them's street. They listened intently to a jumbled account of pyramids, weird priesthoods, and ancient secrets. "Did it happen suddenly or slowly?" asked Brian. Sort of sudden and slowly, said Adam, 'cause a lot of 'em got away in boats to the other countries and taught 'em how to do maths and English and history and stuff. Don't see what's so great about that, said Pepper. Could have been fun when it was sinking, said Brian wistfully, and recalled one occasion when Lower Tadfield had been flooded. People delivering the milk and newspapers by boat, no one having to go to school. If I was Atlantesian, I'd have stayed, said Wensleydale. This was greeted with a disdainful laughter, but he pressed on. You just have to wear a diver's helmet, that's all, and nail all the windows shut, and fill the houses with air. It would be great. Adam greeted this with a chilly stare he'd reserved for any of them who came up with an idea he really wished he'd thought of first. They could have done, he conceded somewhat weakly. After they'd sent all the teachers off in the boats, maybe everyone else would have stayed when it went down. You wouldn't have to wash, said Brian, whose parents forced him to wash a great deal more than he thought could possibly be healthy. Not that it did any good. There was something basically ground in about Brian, because everything would have to stay clean, and you could grow seaweed and stuff in the garden and shoot sharks and have pet octopuses and stuff, and there wouldn't really be any schools and stuff because they'd have gotten rid of all the teachers. They could still be down there now, said Pepper. They thought about the Atlanteans, clad in flowing mystic robes and goldfish bowls, enjoying themselves deep under the choppy waters of the ocean. Huh, said Pepper, summing up their feelings. What shall we do now, said Brian. It's brightened up a bit. In the end, they played a Charles Fort discovering things. This consisted of one of them walking around with ancient remains of an umbrella, while the others treated him to reins of frogs, or rather, frog. They could only find one in the pond. It was an elderly frog who knew the them of old, and tolerated with interest as the price it paid for a good pond and otherwise free of moorings and pike. It put up with things good-naturedly for a while before hopping off to a secret and so far undiscovered hideout in an old drain-pipe, and then they went home for lunch. Adam felt pleased about the morning's work. He'd always known that the world was an interesting place, and his imagination had peopled it with pirates and bandits and spies and astronauts and similar, but he'd also had a nagging suspicion that, when you seriously got right down to it, they were all just things in books and didn't properly exist anymore. Whereas this aquarium age stuff was really real. Grown-up people wrote a lot of books about it. New Aquarian was full of adverts for them. And Bigfoots and Mothmen and Yetis and sea monsters and Surrey pumas really existed. If Cortez, on his peak in Darien, had slightly damp feet from efforts of catching frogs, he felt like Adam at the moment. The world was there. The world was bright and strange, and he was in the middle of it. He bolted his lunch and retired to his room. There were still quite a few new Aquarians he hadn't read yet. The cocoa was a congealed brown sludge half filling the cup. Certain people had spent hundreds of years trying to make sense of the prophecies of Agnes Nutter. They had been very intelligent in the main. Anathema Device, who was about as close to being Agnes as genetic drift would allow, was the best of the bunch. But none of them had been angels. Many people, meeting Aziraphale for the first time, formed three impressions: that he was English, that he was intelligent, and that he was gayer than a tree full of monkeys on nitrous oxide. Two of these were wrong. Heaven is not in England, whatever certain poets may have thought, and angels are sexless unless they really want to make an effort. But he was intelligent. And it was an angelic intelligence which, while not being particularly higher than human intelligence, is much broader and has the advantage of thousands of years of practice. Aziraphale was the first angel to ever own a computer. It was a cheap, slow, plasticky one, much touted as ideal for a small businessman. Aziraphale used it religiously for doing his accounts, which were so scrupulously accurate that the tax authorities had inspected him 5 times in the deep belief that he was getting away with murder somewhere. But these other calculations were of a kind no computer could ever do. Sometimes he would scribble something down on a sheet of paper by his side. It was covered in symbols which only 8 other people in the world would have been able to comprehend. 2 of them had won Nobel Prizes, and one of the other 6 dribbled a lot and wasn't allowed anything sharp because of what he might do with it. Anathema launched into a miso soup and pored over her maps. There was no doubt the area around Tadfield was rich in ley lines, even since the famous Rev Watkins had identified some, but unless she was totally wrong, they were beginning to shift position. She'd spent the week taking on the surroundings with theodolite and pendulum and the ordnance survey map of the Tadfield area, but was now covered with little dots and arrows. She stared at them for some time. Then she picked up a felt-tip pen, and with occasional references to her notebook, she began to join them up. The radio was on. She wasn't really listening, so quite a lot of the main news item passed right by her unheeding ears, and it wasn't until a couple of keywords filtered down into her consciousness that she began to take some notice. Someone called a spokesman sounded close to hysteria. Danger to employees or the public, he was saying, and precisely how much nuclear material has escaped, said the interviewer. There was a pause. We wouldn't say escaped, said the spokesman. Not escaped. Temporarily mislaid. You mean it's still on the premises? We certainly cannot see how it could have been removed from them, said the spokesman. Surely you've considered terrorist activity. There was another pause. Then the spokesman said, in the quiet tones of someone who has had enough and is going to quit after this and raise chickens somewhere, yes, I suppose we must. All we need to do is find some terrorists who are capable of taking an entire nuclear reactor out of its can while it's running without anyone noticing. It weighs about 1,000 tons and is 40 feet high, so they'll be quite strong terrorists. Perhaps you'd like to ring them up, sir, and ask them questions in that supercilious, accusatory way of yours. But you said the power station is still producing electricity, gasped the interviewer. It is. How can it be doing that if it hasn't got any reactors? You could see the spokesman's mad grin even on the radio. You could see his pen poised over the farms for sale column in Poultry World. We don't know, he said. We were hoping you clever buggers at the BBC would have an idea. Anathema looked up from her map. What she had been drawing looked like a galaxy, or the type of carving seen on the better class of the Celtic monolith. The ley lines were shifting. They were forming a spiral. It was centered loosely, with some margin for error, but nevertheless centered on Lower Tadfield. Several thousand miles away, at almost the same moment as Anathema was staring at her spirals, the pleasure cruiser, Morbely, was grounded in 300 fathoms of water. For Captain Vincent, this was just another problem. For example, he knew he should contact the owners, but he never knew from day to day or from hour to hour in this computerized world actually who the owners were. Computers. That was the bloody trouble. The ship's papers were computerized, and it could switch to the most advantageous flag of convenience in microseconds. Its navigation had been computerized as well, constantly updating its position by satellites. Captain Vincent had explained patiently to the owners, whomever they were, that several hundred square meters of steel plating and a barrel of rivets would be a better investment, and he had been informed that his recommendation did not accord with the current cost-benefit flow predictions. Captain Vincent strongly suspected that despite all its electronics, the ship was worth more sunk than afloat, and would probably go down at the most perfectly pinpointed wreck in nautical history. By interference, this also meant that he was more valued dead than alive. He sat at his desk quietly leafing through international maritime codes, whose 600 pages contained brief yet pregnant messages designed to transmit the news of every conceivable nautical eventuality across the world with the minimum of confusion and, above all, cost. What he wanted to say was this: was sailing SSW at a point of 33 degrees north, 47 degrees, 72 west. First mate, who you may recall was appointed in New Guinea, against my wishes and is probably a headhunter, indicated by signs that something was amiss. It appears that quite a vast expanse of seabed has risen up in the night. It contains a large number of buildings, many of which appeared pyramid-like in structure. We are aground in the courtyard of one of these. There are some rather unpleasant statues. Amiable old men in long robes and diving helmets have come aboard the ship and are mingling happily with the passengers who think we organized this. Please advise. His questing finger moved slowly down the page and stopped. Good old international codes. They'd been devised 80 years before, but the men in those days had really thought hard about the kind of perils that might possibly be encountered in the deep. He picked up his pen and wrote down XXXVQVVX. Translated, it meant, have found lost continent of Atlantis. High Priest has just won quartz contest. It jolly well isn't. It jolly well is. It isn't, you know. It jolly well is. It isn't. All right. Well, what about volcanoes? Wensleydale sat back, a look of triumph on his face. What about 'em? Said Adam. All that lather comes up from the center of the earth where it's all hot, said Wensleydale. I saw a program. It had David Attenborough, so it's true. The other them looked at Adam. It was like watching a tennis match. The hollow earth theory was not going over well in the quarry, a beguiling idea that had stood up to the probings of such remarkable thinkers as Cyrus Reed Teed, Bulwer Lytton, and Adolf Hitler was bending dangerously close in the wind of Wensleydale's searingly bespectacled logic. I didn't say it was hollow all the way through, said Adam. No one said it was hollow all the way through. It probably goes down miles and miles to make room for all the lather and oil and coal and Tibetan tunnels and such like. But then it's hollow after that. That's what people think, that there's a hole at the North Pole to let the air in. Never seen it on an atlas, sniffed Wensleydale. The government won't let them put it on a map in case people go in and have a look, said Adam. The reason being the people living inside don't want people looking down on them all the time. What do you mean Tibetan tunnels, said Pepper. You said Tibetan tunnels. Ah, didn't I tell you about them? Three heads shook. It's amazing. You know Tibet? They nodded doubtfully. A series of images had risen in their minds. Yaks, Mount Everest, people called Grasshopper, little old men sitting on mountains, other people learning kung fu in ancient temples, and snow. Well, you know all about those teachers that left Atlantis when it sunk? They nodded again. Well, some of them went to Tibet, and now they run the world. They're called the Secret Masters, on account of being teachers, I suppose. And they've got the secret underground city called Shambhala, and the tunnels that go all over the world, so they know everything that goes on and control everything. Some people reckon that they really live under the Gobi Desert, he said. He added loftily, but most competent authorities reckon it's Tibet, all right. Better for the tunneling, anyway. The them instinctively looked at the grubby, dirt-covered chalk beneath their feet. How come they know everything? Said Pepper. They just have to listen, right? Hazarded Adam. They just have to sit in their tunnels and listen. You know what hearing teachers have. They can hear a whisper right across the room. My granny used to put glass against the wall, said Brian. She said it was disgusting, the way she could hear everything that went on next door. And these tunnels go everywhere, do they? Said Pepper, still staring at the ground. All over the world, said Adam firmly. Must have took a long time, said Pepper doubtfully. You remember when we tried digging that tunnel out in the field? We were at it all afternoon, and you had to scrunch up to get in. Yes, but they've been doing it for millions of years. You can do really good tunnels if you've got millions of years. I thought the Tibetans were conquered by the Chinese, and the Dalai Lama had to go to India, said Wensleydale, but without much conviction. Wensleydale read his father's newspaper every evening, but the prosaic everydayness of the world always seemed to melt under the powerhouse of Adam's explanations. I bet they're down there now, said Adam, ignoring this. They'd been all over the place by now, sitting underground and listening. They looked at one another. If we dug down quickly, said Brian. Pepper, who was always a lot quicker on the uptake, groaned. What did you have us go and say that for? Said Adam. Fat lot of good it does us trying to surprise them now, isn't it? With you shouting something like that out. I was just thinking we could dig down and you just have to go and warn them. I don't think they'd dig all those tunnels, said Wensleydale doggedly. It doesn't make any sense. Tibet's hundreds of miles away. Oh yes, and I suppose you know more about it than Madame Blavatsky, sniffed Adam. Now, if I was a Tibetan, said Wensleydale in a reasonable tone of voice, I'd just dig straight down to the hollow bit in the middle and then run inside and dig straight up wherever I wanted to be. They give this due consideration. You've got to admit it's more sensible than tunnels, said Pepper. Yes, well, I expect that's what they do, said Adam. They'd be bound to have thought of something as simple as that. Brian stared dreamily at the sky while his finger probed the contents of one ear. Funny, really, he said. You spend your whole life going to school and learning stuff, and they never tell you about stuff like the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and all these masters running around the inside of the Earth. Why do we have to learn boring stuff when there's all this brilliant stuff that we could be learning? That's what I want to know. There was a chorus of agreement. Then they went out and played Charles Fort and the Atlantesians versus the ancient masters of Tibet, but the Tibeters claimed that using mystic ancient lasers was cheating. This has been my section of Good Omens for the COVID-19 stay inside, read along thing. And this has been Philip J. Fry. He sat with me for the whole reading. Thank you everyone to listening, and thank you to everyone participating, and thank you to Neil Gaiman for allowing stories he's written to be read during this time. Everybody stay inside, stay safe,